Today we're going to talk about how to block the effects of sugar and other carbs and other things as well. If the person's on the ketogenic diet and they somehow come off the ketogenic diet and they eat something that they shouldn't be eating, and how do they neutralize the effects of that? That's what we're going to talk about. All right, so let's start with number one, sugar. Your friend has just eaten some sugar. What should they do to counteract the effects of the sugar? Now, the damaging part of sugar is that it tends to act like rust in your arteries, destroys your energy factories, your mitochondria. You have something called the glycemic index, right, of foods. So you eat a certain food, and the higher the sugar, the higher the spike, and it creates damage. And so each carbohydrate has an index from high to low, and you also have something else called the glycemic load, and that's looking at the carbohydrate in food, but it's also taking into consideration fiber, because fiber tends to buffer and inhibit this sugar spike. And so out of all the carbohydrates, fiber, which is a carbohydrate, has no effect on insulin. So other carbohydrates will raise insulin, but not fiber. So it's neutral. And so the more something has fiber in it, the less the sugar effects. Like carrots, for example, are loaded with fiber. And so it's really hard to spike the blood sugar if you're consuming a carrot. Unless you juice the carrot and just drink the juice, right? Carrot juice, which I used to do a long time ago. So what you need to understand if your friend consumes some sugar is to recommend that they start consuming some fiber right away. And if there's fiber in a salad, that would be the best thing, because that will buffer or slow the effect of this spike. The other thing to know about sugar is that sugar, especially refined sugar, depletes you of potassium, B1, zinc, and magnesium. And so if you were to take some electrolytes and B vitamins and trace minerals, that will counteract the deficiencies that you just created from that sugar. So that's just a way of kind of minimizing the side effects from that. Grains, because eventually grains turn into sugar. And there's different things about grains that you need to know. Number one, you have the refined grains, right? So if you're consuming refined grains, it's going to deplete you of certain nutrients, because when you refine the grain, it's like empty of nutrients. So when you consume that, your body starts to metabolize it, and then it needs to pull from its reserves certain nutrients to burn it up. And so this is why the more refined grains or even sugar that you consume, the more of certain nutrients that you need, because refined foods does not come with these nutrients. So you have to tap into your own reserves to be able to process them or digest them. So refined grains have their own issues, but then you have the whole grains. Whole grains has some nutrients, not as much as you might think, but it also has something called phytic acid and other anti-nutrients. So the phytic acid actually blocks you from absorbing certain minerals. So if you're consuming whole grains, you might want to consume an oyster or some shellfish to get those minerals back, because shellfish, especially oysters, are loaded with zinc. The other big problem with grains is the gluten. That's the protein in the wheat or some other grain. So you can have a gluten allergy, you can have a gluten intolerance, but it can really tear up and create inflammation in your gut on so many people, especially because they've did hybrids of grains, especially wheat. And they don't just come with more carbs, they come with more protein in some cases. And that protein can do some interesting things to your gut. It can even mimic a bit of morphine, which numbs the pain that it creates, making you think it's totally fine to consume, right? So you keep eating it, and then sometime down the road, you have this gut inflammation that creates all sorts of other additional problems that you didn't suspect. So just as a side note, to counter inflammation in your gut, okay, let's say you want to counter that, you can take glutamine or consume foods high in glutamine. What would that be? Meat. And this is why when someone goes on a meat diet or a carnivore diet and gets all this glutamine from that, they tend to heal their guts, as long as they're not consuming at the same time the sugar and the grains and the starches, things like that. So this video is all about neutralizing the effects of some of these carbs and other things as well. The other thing refined grains depletes is vitamin E. And there's a big correlation between a vitamin E deficiency and angina, because the heart needs that vitamin E. In fact, if you're low in vitamin E, your muscles, including your heart muscle, will work harder and you might have more weakness within the muscle. So when you think of eating refined grains or your friend eating refined grains, think of deficiencies in the B complex, especially B1 and other B vitamins, as well as vitamin E. So you want to put those back to neutralize the effects. You can even consume some nutritional yeast to kind of get your natural Bs. Just make sure that they're not enriched with synthetic B vitamins. Also, I want to mention if you're consuming grain foods like breads, pasta, things like that in Europe, people have less bloating because they ferment the grains longer, which actually tends to break down more carbs because the microbes eat the carbs. And also it can actually break down a lot of the gluten as well. And all that enrichment of iron and synthetic vitamins will tend to make your gut feel very heavy. The other thing about grains is a lot of times they'll use Roundup Ready or called glyphosate, which is a herbicide to kind of dry out these grains. So now you're consuming this grain that has these chemicals in it, which is not good. So make sure you have an organic grain if you're going to do grains. As another side note, I want to mention the chemistry of glucose is very similar to the chemistry of vitamin C. So if you're eating sugar, right, don't expect any vitamin C absorption because it's competitive. And this is why when people take like those vitamin C gummies, I mean, they're just loaded with sugar. You're not getting any vitamin C. So just realize that glucose blocks vitamin C. So one thing you need to do, or tell your friend when they consume this carb or sugar, to have more vitamin C foods. The food that has the most vitamin C is the sauerkraut, but then you also have bell peppers, lemons, or really any of the leafy greens has a good amount of vitamin C. And I also want to mention berries. Any of the berries are a good source of vitamin C. When you start consuming fruit, okay, people always ask me about fruit. Is fruit bad? Well, yeah, it's high in sugar.
And our bodies were designed to consume moderate amounts of fruit that wasn't genetically made sweeter. But nowadays they are produced with more carbs and sugar contents.
But also fruit is seasonal, right? But we have it all year round. But is there a big difference between fruit and high fructose corn syrup? Yes, there's a huge difference. The fruit has the fiber, okay? High fructose corn syrup is like drinking this pure fructose and glucose, and it creates a completely different effect than if you were to even like get your fructose from the juice from a fruit because you have the antioxidants. You see, if someone's a diabetic, right, and they have high levels of sugar in the blood, and if you're a diabetic, you should know this. You have all these side effects, these complications from diabetes. You can greatly neutralize a lot of those side effects by just consuming antioxidants from vegetables, and also things like benfotiamine is a really good one, or alpha-lipoic acid. I mean, a lot of diabetics get like peripheral neuropathy of their feet, where their feet are numb or painful. If they just took some benfotiamine or alpha-lipoic acid, they would at least not feel that pain anymore because it decreases the complications of diabetes. Diabetes affects 4 areas: your brain and nervous system, your vascular, your arteries, and the eyes and the kidneys. So, of course, changing your diet is the ultimate solution. But also, just to counteract or neutralize some of these other effects, you can just start eating these high antioxidant foods. And you can also exercise. You may have high blood glucose, not necessarily from eating carbs, but it can come from stress. It can come from not sleeping. It can come from various reasons. Let's say you're on the ketogenic diet and you haven't transitioned and your body's still producing sugar because it has really bad insulin resistance. You can counteract a lot of that just by exercising every single day because that burns off the sugar and it actually strengthens the mitochondria. It actually makes new mitochondria. And then there's another thing you can do, like a lot of people are on metformin, being a diabetic. If you were to take berberine, for example, it's a natural remedy. There's studies that show that it can create a similar effect, but with less side effects. Cinnamon is another thing you can take. Just put some cinnamon on your toast and sugar in your butter where you make this cinnamon toast. I'm just being sarcastic. But cinnamon actually can help stabilize blood sugars. And so can apple cider vinegar. That helps to neutralize some of the effects of consuming sugar and refined carbs. One from acidifying the stomach, another from just helping your blood sugars. So you'll find that if you have some apple cider vinegar, in the morning when you wake up, if you did have some carbs, your sugars will be a little bit better from the apple cider vinegar. And the other point I want to bring about that, because since we're on the topic of your blood sugars, is that if you consume lean protein, as in whey protein powder, you can actually spike insulin. That's the thing that helps to control blood glucose. Now, there's something called the insulin index, and that is looking at all the non-carbohydrate things that can increase insulin that go beyond just like sugar and things like that. So the thing that really spikes the insulin is the whey protein because there's absolutely no fat in there. So this leads us to the next point. Fat has one of the least effects on insulin. Like fiber and fat, they don't trigger insulin too much. So fat is a way to buffer the insulin response. So if you have the choice between egg whites and the whole egg, always have the whole egg. Or a fatty hamburger versus a lean piece of meat, do the fatty hamburger. If you have the choice between a fatty nut like macadamia nuts or maybe pecans, those are much better than the nuts that are leaner. Or whole fat kefir or cheese versus low fat or no fat cheese, huge difference. Go for the fat. The fat will buffer the insulin response from the protein. Another thing that will help you neutralize the bad effects from the sugar is fasting. Okay, if you fast, definitely do regular intermittent fasting,
but a periodic prolonged fast
will greatly help reduce the damage that sugar has done to your cells. I think if we combine certain things, we can create a cool effect. Let's say you had a salad, right? You have the fiber in there. Doesn't have a lot of sugar in there. We add the apple cider vinegar to it, and then we add the olive oil. Okay, we have fat, we have the vinegar, we have the fiber. So the oil actually helps pull the fat-soluble nutrients out of the salad. And this combination is kind of a nice compounding effect of one meal to help counter maybe some bad things that a person ate. Now, I talked about sugar, I talked about grains. Now I want to talk about alcohol a bit. Alcohol is from grains, and alcohol depletes you of B1. Alcohol is detoxified from the liver as a toxin. So it takes priority and it creates damage to your liver and inflammation, etc. So if you happen to have known of someone who has drank some alcohol, tell them to counter it by consuming B1, vitamin B1 or nutritional yeast, but B1's a good one. They probably won't have a hangover from that. Pickle juice also is a good kind of an electrolyte that can help counter that, or just taking electrolytes in general can help reduce the effects of a hangover, which is the toxicity that you're feeling of what's happening in the liver. And anything that you take to damage the liver, milk thistle is a good antidote or neutralization factor. Milk thistle is good for anything poisonous, whether you had a snake bite or consumed a poisonous mushroom, or you drank alcohol or took Tylenol, or the next thing on the issue, which is drugs. If you're on certain drugs, they can damage the liver. Take some milk thistle. That will help counter or neutralize some of the bad effect. If you're on a statin drug, make sure you take coenzyme Q10 or you may end up with some muscle damage. If you're a diabetic and you take metformin, make sure you take B1 and B12. And if you're on an antibiotic, make sure you take a probiotic. If you're on an antacid, really you just need to take betaine hydrochloride because that antacid is going to get rid of acid in your stomach. And usually the true cause of an acidic stomach is a lack of acid. So a lot of times you'll go from bad to worse. So if you start to add more acid in there, it will actually help neutralize some of the side effects that it's creating, which is a lack of stomach acid.
Number 4
is if you, let's say you consumed a lot of salt or like sodium, and you started retaining sodium and you wanted to neutralize some of the effects. Let's say it affected your blood pressure. Just take potassium. Potassium helps counter the bad effects of sodium. So you're going to get rid of fluid retention. You're going to feel less bloated. And potassium is really good to help maintain blood pressure too. So have a big salad or some high potassium food. And the same thing goes with like sugar. If you eat a lot of sugar, you deplete potassium. And then without potassium, your pulse rate starts going higher and higher and higher. And so again, an antidote for a high pulse rate would be that potassium.
Number 5
is not a carbohydrate, but it's called oxalates. And then since we're on the topic of kind of neutralizing things, I just want to mention it. When someone gets on the ketogenic diet, they usually are doing spinach, and they're usually doing some chocolate, like some no sugar chocolate, and almonds or almond flour. All of those are a bit high in oxalates. So if you were to consume some cheese with any one of those, you would help to minimize the bad effects of that. And also, I almost forgot magnesium. Magnesium will also reduce the effects of that as well. Now, since I mentioned salt or sodium, let's also mention the drinking too much water. Let's say you drank a lot of water, and just so you know, drinking too much water can dilute the blood of sodium, and it can create some serious problems called hyponatremia, and your brain can swell. People have died by consuming a gallon of water in a short period of time, like 3 hours. So you want to drink when you're thirsty and make sure you don't overdrink. But the solution, the antidote, is just to take some salt if you drink too much water, and other electrolytes as well.
Number 7.
If someone goes on the ketogenic diet and they do intermittent fasting, what happens is the demand for minerals and B vitamins goes up. So some people, if they're not taking electrolytes or B vitamins or eating foods high in those nutrients, they can end up with some side effects like keto rash, keto fatigue, things like that. Number 8 is not food, but I think it's kind of an important just to bring up. It's just stress, okay? How do you neutralize the effects of stress? Well, what does stress do? It can deplete you of zinc, B1, magnesium. So, of course, taking B1 would be very good to help counter stress. You will find if you take B1, your anxiety will go away. You'll feel less anxious. A magnesium deficiency will cause cramping in the legs and fatigue. If you take magnesium, you'll have more energy, you have more endurance, and you have less leg cramps. And stress also depletes zinc. So when you're low on zinc, you may find your testosterone goes down, your immune system goes down, and if you're very deficient, you might even notice your smell and taste go away as well. And another way to counter the bad effects of stress is exercise, long walks, and physical work. You want to do something that just pulls you out of your head, and sleep as well. Sleep is the antidote to stress. Now, because of the censoring and the suppressing of the algorithms on YouTube, it's becoming more difficult to find my content. And there's a lot of content that I cannot put on YouTube, unfortunately. So to make sure you have full access of all my information, go to drberg.com and subscribe to my newsletter by clicking the link down below in the description. I will see you on the other side.